This is the Reluctant Leader podcast, the podcast designed to help you step out of the shadows and become an inspirational leader. I'm your host, Mark Terrell, and each episode I will be getting to grips with a leadership topic by interviewing an expert in their field. I'll be picking their brains for those golden nuggets that will help you be the best you can be. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing at thereluctantleader.co.uk, and please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So let's get on with the show. On today's podcast, I'll be talking communication with Ian Marsh, who is a renowned listener, speaker, coach, facilitator and mediator who focuses on helping people talk about the things that matter most to them, the things they generally find hardest to talk about. A former lawyer, Ian has worked with business families for more than 40 years and has seen at firsthand the damage intractable conflicts can do to people and their relationships if it is left to their own devices. Through his new book, If It's So Good to Talk, Why Is It So Hard?, Ian brings his passion for helping people to overcome the perils and discover the power of face-to-face conversation in a digital and increasingly polarised world to a far broader audience. I hope you enjoy it, and I will catch you on the other side. So welcome, Ian, to the Reluctant Leader podcast.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be with you.
I was just thinking back to when we were sort of introduced. It was when we were both involved in another podcast about family businesses. And obviously that's something that you've been doing recently. So what I'm going to start off with, actually, the first question I'm going to ask you is actually why do you do what you do? And maybe the pivotal moment that made you actually start doing it.
Okay. Interesting question. I guess I spent more than 40 years practicing law, and the last big chunk of that, I found myself involved in a lot of family conflict and litigating that sometimes for years on end in multiple jurisdictions, which, you know, from the lawyer's perspective is fine. You meet interesting people, do good, challenging work, and you get well paid for it. But from the client's perspective, it's less good. So I decided to train as a mediator, and then when I did that, I left the law and initially started mediating the sorts of conflicts that I'd advised on before. And then I soon came to realise that most of those conflicts were really just down to a breakdown in communication. Mm-hmm. And that rather than trying to be a turbocharged deal broker, if I could restore communication between the parties, then either the conflict fell away completely because it was a sort of construct to beat each other up with, or they were perfectly capable of sorting it out themselves. And that's the route I started going down, and I just became more and more fascinated over time with why it is that smart, well-educated, successful people who love one another can't actually talk about the stuff that matters most. And if they can't, what hope is there for the rest of us, really? So I started studying that more and more. I discovered a subject called interpersonal neurobiology, which seemed to offer a lot of explanations that worked for me. Mm-hmm. And I've just gone on over time, focusing more and more on that piece because it's just so important. Not just in families, but in civil discourse. It's important for young people to have those skills and not get too drawn away by playing with screens and so on. And clearly, in the leadership role, if you don't have those skills, then you can't build and maintain relationships or create the safe spaces where your team might communicate effectively and work better together.
Absolutely. And from my experience, I've worked with my family, and the thing that we probably didn't spend enough time on is actually learning how to communicate with one another. We didn't know enough about the right way to do it, and personalities took over. I guess that's typical of what you were seeing.
Yeah, I think you bring up two very good points. The first one is that many families, be they families in business or family offices, they always think their success or lack of it is down to the economy, the tax regime, the markets, all the so-called hard areas over which they have no influence whatsoever. And by and large, they pay no attention to the biggest driver, which is their relationships, which is communication, which in some ways very ironic. And yes, the personalities taking over. I think one of the things I found working with families in particular, but all long-term teams, is that when things get tough, you tend to revert to stereotype. So in a family situation, you're probably reverting to something when the kids were adolescent. So this one's the joker, this one's the peacemaker, this one's the practical one. And it's much easier if you just drop back into stereotype than actually try and work with the person in front of you. Of course, It doesn't get you very far.
Yeah, and we sort of it's almost like giving people excuses, isn't it? Oh, that's what they're like, but really, what we need to do is actually learn more about how we all communicate. And obviously, you've written a book about this. I've read it, and I've just started rereading it because it's so important to understand more about what good communication is. So your book is intriguingly titled "If It's So Good to Talk, Why Is It So Hard?" And that is it, isn't it? That's the
absolutely
the thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I've mentioned the book, so I think it'd be a good idea just to explain what's in it. I noticed that you've split it into 4 sections. Maybe it'd be a good idea of why you did that and what each section is about.
The why is probably difficult. That's the way it came out.
Right.
But I think, the first section is really looking at what conversation is. I wrestled for a long time about whether to talk about communication or conversation, and conversation works better for me, particularly in the modern environment. It's communication invokes technology, and it suggests the transmission of data and very little else. And I think there's an awful lot more in conversation. And also, as you gathered from reading it, my focus is very much on face-to-face, where it can be done, because we respond and react very differently there than we do over this very useful technology that we're using.
Yeah.
So the first couple of chapters are really exploring what the nature of effective conversation is, the fact that whilst we never taught them, it has rules and there are effects if we don't join in and abide by those rules, and we stop talking across people, or we talk at cross purposes. We all know how frustrating that can be at times. It happens, and that's really just to set the scene. The 2 centre sections are the real meat of it, and the first of those looks at what I've discovered and what I believe to be the things that prevent us communicating well, the obstacles, the things that get in the way. And there's underpinning that, there's quite a lot of neuroscience research, some psychology, but I've tried to keep all the long words out of it and just summarize a few people's life work into a few pages each, but I hope it gets the flavor of it across. The third section then looks at what we can do to try and improve the situation, not in a tactical way. There's some really good books out there about having difficult conversations, but some of them look at it very much from if you use these words, you get different results, or if you have these four, aspects of conversation in mind and plan them, you get better results. The approach I've taken is to, as I would say, actually rewire the brain, give yourself a different pro-communication mindset that makes the whole thing easier. And then, because all of that is focused primarily on one-on-one conversation, the last section focuses on how we can create what I would call pro-social groups. Groups in which communication flows more easily, and some of the perils, pitfalls, and other things to explore in trying to do that, which obviously would be of interest in the leadership context, because the leader without a team is perhaps not leading.
Yes. And the thing that I've found really interesting is I think when we go into a conversation, if we don't go into it with a win-win scenario, in other words, we want to get an outcome that's right for us and for the other person, then straight away that's not going to be, we're not going to get a good outcome, are we? Because if it's I want to win this argument, what I got a flavour of is that if you want a good outcome, you've got to set the right environment firstly, so that everyone feels comfortable. Because there's no point in putting on in a place where one of you doesn't feel comfortable. So finding somewhere neutral, that's quite important, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the centerpiece of the problems we have comes from evolution, I suppose. What a lot of people will know as fight fright, which a guy called Stephen Porges has researched for a lifetime and reframed as socialization, mobilization, and immobilization. And the key is to keep everybody in that socialization mode. And I would say, in your reluctant leader context, it's difficult for all of us, because it's hard to put the other person first when you're bursting full of ideas you want to put across. But if you don't put them first, they're never going to hear what you've got to say. So you have to do that. And I think, the mark of the leader and a characteristic I would encourage aspiring leaders to develop is taking responsibility for creating that environment. And that means everybody has to feel safe in its broadest sense. That includes yourself, obviously, but also you have to be non-threatening. The space has to be non-threatening. And what you do when you're there has to be non-threatening. I would go further on the last bit, because if you want to persuade, you really do have to do an awful lot of listening first.
Yes, and it's the old seek to understand before you seek to be understood thing, isn't it? And if you can show that, and show that you are willing to understand the other person's point of view first, then you're more likely to be listened to afterwards. Is that fair to say?
I would say it's more fundamental even than that. I think you do need to seek to understand before the other, but before seeking to understand, you need to seek to connect. I think the primary thing you have to do is establish a connection with the other person, because if you don't have a carrier wave, there's no point trying to broadcast anything. It's not going anywhere. And I think that the physical act of what I would call deep listening, creates a sense of safety. It's where rapport and trust comes from. And when you've been listened to in that way, you're much more open to listening to others. It's an interesting thing that emerged from my mediation practice, was that you don't necessarily have to be listened to by the person who's trying to persuade you. I found that if I give somebody a good listening to, and then put them in a room with people they were having an argument with, they were much more open to listening. And I think that's one of the reasons I would encourage anybody to have a group of confidants they can resort to, is that when you're working with a team, you've got to let them tell their own stories in their own time, in their own words, ideally not interrupting them, even if you set them a time frame in which they have to do it, but give them that space to do that. And you need listening to too. So sometimes you have to look outside the team for that, and have whether it's a coach, a mentor, or just a listener. But having people who will listen to you in that way, and obviously respect all the confidences too, is probably something. Well, it is something I would encourage all leaders to do.
Yeah, and I love the way you've mentioned that. About a good listening to, because we hear a lot about somebody deserves a good talking to. Someone deserves a good listening to too, don't they?
Absolutely. I think particularly in a team setting, I don't know about you, but over my career, I have sat in so many team meetings where team members really get no opportunity other than to ask how high they should be jumping. Is that actually getting the best out of them? There's a lot to be said for chain of command, and there are circumstances where that needs to operate like that. But if you're in a creative environment, if you want everybody to be contributing to their best and feeling valued, you've got to give them a safe space in which to say whatever's in their head, without criticizing it, condemning, contradicting it. The three quick. Let me put it to you. If you're talking to somebody, what is it brings your shutters down?
It's interesting. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I really wasn't quite as aware of this has been a problem as it is to me, actually. But when someone interrupts me, I really do. It really irritates me in a big way. And I'd done a psychometric test, and one of the things that came back to me was Mark doesn't like being interrupted. And I thought, my God, is absolutely right. And it really does irritate me, because I know then, as soon as somebody interrupts me, they're not really listening to me, are they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, okay, find me 10 people who do like being interrupted. No, I think I read a line in a book the other day that said interrupting people infantilizes them, because it's telling them that they're not really capable of speaking for themselves. So if a leader starts interrupting, what sort of message is it sending to the team?
Yeah. It's almost saying, look, okay, you've had your say now. We've seen. Let's take an example that everyone will probably resonate with, and that's the president of the United States at the moment, Donald Trump. I witnessed a press conference where, he was inviting questions, but probably I don't think anybody actually got to finish off what the question was before he interrupted and basically gives a response. And it's irritating. Even if you're involved, it's irritating. But on the outside, it's irritating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. And I think so for a lot of people, it's going to be interruption or contradiction. being, if I dare risk moving it towards the difficult conversation in this country at the moment, both sides of that divide keep telling the other side why they voted, and how only an idiot would do that. And I just slightly question whether that is the way to bring the country back together again. Yes. But that's for another day, I guess. And the other big thing is accusation. I mean, almost any sentence that begins with "you" can bring the shutters down so quickly. Whereas if a curious manner of engagement, i.e. being curious, asking questions, silence being the most powerful question we have, actually. It's giving people the space to talk. It's interesting in my work that if I want people to open up, I often don't ask questions at all. I just sit there until they start talking.
Yes.
And remarkably few people can withstand more than about 7 to 10 seconds of complete silence. I'm completely relaxed. I can go for hours. But,
but it's taken a lot of practice, I guess.
It takes some. I mean, it's to be fair, I think it is partly a personality thing. I'm an introvert who's learned to work in a public space. But the introverts growing up is a lot about listening rather than pushing yourself into the crowd. So, there is some of that in it, I accept.
One thing that I did pull out of the book, and being a lover of acronyms, was the RAIN acronym. And I think that'd be worth you just running through those the four things that make up the RAIN, RAIN acronym. Okay,
I mean it's an acronym for a technique that is I learned it in context of mindfulness meditation and dealing with stuff that arises in the course of that, but it's actually usable with almost anything that's troubling. And the R is to recognize what's going on in the meditation context. The thought that appears in your head, the emotional feeling that arises in you, the pain in your back or wherever it is, and obviously that can work in focusing on anything. So the first step obviously is just to recognize it, and it's usually very helpful just to give it a name. So again, sort of pain, hunger, whatever it might be. The A is for acceptance. And because a lot of the grief we cause ourselves is because we object to the way the world is this instant, and actually you can't change that. I mean, your senses and your brain are wired in a very efficient way, but it does take a certain amount of time for the signal to get from your senses to your brain. So actually, by the time you're aware of something, it's in the past. So you definitely can't change it. And just that sense of acceptance, also that, most things come and go. All things pass. Let it be. All that good stuff, which can sound very trite, but actually doing the mindfulness type exercises, the one thing you see very quickly is that all these thoughts literally do come and go. Emotions to physical sensations. So if you are getting angry, it will pass. Your mother's old advice of counting to 10 is actually not a bad technique. It's we haven't improve that much on it.
No.
So yeah, recognizing what's there, letting it go. The I is the real heart of it, which is inquiry. What's you've given it a label. You've got a sense of what's going on, but what's really going on? And where does it come from? And here there's loads of ways of asking questions. I mean, I sometimes use the sort of Jeremy Clarkson type question. So if this was a car, what would it be?
Right.
Ask completely off the wall questions to try and get because it's interesting what answers they produce. What if it's a sensation in your body, where is it? What shape is it? What temperature is it? All manner of questions that are not sort of analytical. And I think that's the key to a lot of this. You just, excuse me, we overanalyze things. There's a debate amongst neuroscientists and so on as to whether we are actually rational or whether we just rationalize things after the event. I think I tend to the latter school, but I'm open to persuasion. But just sort of looking, in that difficult conversation, you have these views about everything, you have these beliefs, but where do they actually come from? Are they really from you, or do they come from fake news or real news, or what your parents told you 40 years ago, which might not be quite so true, urban myth? It's interesting when we start looking at stuff in an inquiry. We're just being curious about it and see what comes up.
Yeah.
And the N is, the N is given so many different words attached to it. Non-identification is one, which comes up a lot, which means that this isn't actually me. I was taught that was it. All thoughts are real, they're not all true. You have these thoughts, you have these emotions, but they're not who you are. You don't actually have to act out on them. You have that ability not to, if you give yourself the space, and a lot of using this is about giving you that space. So sort of accepting that these things may just be electrochemical stuff going on in your body rather than a program you have to execute through. And part of it also you do in the R part as well, the recognition, because if you're there's a big difference between I am in pain and pain, or I am angry and anger. If you just notice that there's some anger there, that's one thing. If you say, I am angry, and this keeps on going, very soon your self-talk is that I am an angry person. And you sort of wish yourself into these things. Whereas if you okay, that's anger. What am I angry about? Why am I angry? And sometimes there's just no answer. It's just a flash of chemicals in your body, and your acculturated brain tells you that the label for that is anger. And then those little critters I name in the book as mind monkeys get to work with it and start spinning a story around it.
Yes.
And off you go. And all this is really designed to sort of stop that before it gets out of control. And if you're doing that in a social context, then you will send out far fewer threatening signals, and the people around you are going to relax too. And you'll be able to listen, and they'll follow suit.
Yes, I mean that's such an important thing, isn't it? To just recognise that you're not an angry person; you're just feeling anger for some reason, and then put it into context as to what's going on and what can I do about it and what's caused it, and try to be a bit more, not try to get sucked up into it, or try not to be sucked into the actual emotion of it, and say, well, it's just something I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, I mean, we have an incredible urge to see patterns, and that comes out. Somebody says something, and you feel some hurt. The tendency is to assume not only that what they said caused it, but they did that intentionally, because we think of ourselves as intentional beings.
Yes.
And instead of checking, we just let that program the next step, and then it ramps up and up and up.
It's all interesting stuff, but I don't think we can, as time's running out, I don't think we can leave this conversation about communication and not talk about the role that or the impact that technology has on all this. What do you think of that?
I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Genies don't go back in bottles, so there's no point. I think the things that are clear from the science are that all these gadgets we have are addictive. So if you have a vaguely addictive personality, you're going to be stuck. You get that little hit of dopamine every time somebody likes something you do, or every time somebody posts something in your direction, and so on and so forth. So that's an issue to be aware of. They're also rightly called weapons of mass distraction. Just as there's some wonderful research out there showing that just having a mobile phone face down on the desk when you're meeting somebody reduces both people's feeling of connection and effective communication. I mean, basically, if you've got 500 friends in that little box and just one guy sitting across the desk, where are you going to be paying attention to? So that's an issue. I think also it seems quite clear now that when we are posting stuff, when we're interacting through technology, our level of self-editing plummets, which is given as an explanation why people post wholly inappropriate photographs of themselves into an environment that the head of HR at the next employer is likely to find. So, and I think one of the things that being face-to-face does is that we're reading not just the voice, but the entire body. We're picking up tiny movements in the muscles of the face, which so when we sense that we're pushing the boundary too far, we pick that up quite quickly, and we start editing. That doesn't happen through the technology. And even if you're using a piece of kit with video, if you think of it, for me to look as though I'm looking you in the face, I have to look at the camera, not at the picture of your face. They're tiny distances often, but so if you're trying to come across as though you're engaging me eye to eye, you're actually having to look away, which alters the way you speak because you're not looking at me. And if you do look at me in the face so you feel more comfortable, you look to me as though you're looking away, so now you're looking shifty. So unless we have if we have a great relationship in the background, we know each other well, none of that matters. But if we either of us starts getting stressed, then it starts coming back into play again.
It's funny. I was just thinking that when you put your phone on the table in front of you when you're talking to someone, it's almost like the elephant in the room, isn't it? It's like, is the phone going to ring? Is there something that he's waiting to happen? Is he going to be picking up the phone in a minute just to check his social media? Is something going to happen because it's on the table in front of him? Why has he put it there? Why hasn't he put it in the bag, or he or she? So,
absolutely.
It's a small thing, but can have a big impact on the quality of the communication at the end.
Absolutely. And yet you go into these, I don't know whether it's your experience, but you go into meetings with a group of professionals, and these days, if somebody isn't actually actively contributing to the conversation, they've got their phone out and they're working on another client's affairs. And if I'm the client in the room, that doesn't build my confidence.
No. This is all interesting, fantastically interesting stuff, and we could talk all day. But we've got to sort of sum things up a bit. So I'm going to ask you just to sum up maybe 3 things that someone in a leadership position can use when they're communicating to someone, so that they can get the best outcome for them and for everyone, really.
Yeah, I think that the first would be to make sure that you do have somebody outside that group who can listen to you non-judgmentally, without wanting to tell you what to do, just give you that good listening to, and respect the confidentialities of that. Mm-hmm. So everybody needs people to fall back on. I think the second is to give people that space to talk. So let them say what they need to say in their own words, in their own time. Yeah. If a meeting doesn't permit endless talk, then maybe have a rule that everybody gets X minutes to make their contribution, and nobody else will interrupt, contradict, ridicule, all of those things. Yeah. And then see what ideas you've got on the table that you can do something with. Mm-hmm. And the third is be curious about everything. Develop a habit of curiosity, because that's the key to an open mind. If you think you know the answer to everything, you're never going to look for new answers. Whereas if you're, why does this happen? Always ask questions. Take up hobbies that develop curiosity. I got a book on sketching, which I bought because the blurb on the back said, sketching is curiosity made manifest. And you have to look. Yeah. And the more you look, the better the sketch. So write poetry. Anything that's about being in the present moment and just knowing everything there is to know about it. And then when if you encourage that sort of behavior, then when you meet other people, why is your life experience different than mine? It's not a criticism. It's we've got different views on this. If we put them together, what are the synergies? Yeah. Well, Ian, thank you ever so much. The fantastic advice. I hope, I'm sure that listeners have picked up some nuggets of wisdom there that they can use in their leadership roles. Thank you again for joining me. I hope we'll have the opportunity to continue our conversation sometime in the future. But for now, thanks very much. Thank you. Look forward to it. Thank you for listening today. As action leads to outcomes, make sure you make a note to start, stop, or continue doing whatever struck a chord in this episode. Don't forget to subscribe at thereluctantleader.co.uk, where you'll find links to all the past episodes, vlogs, blogs, and how you can get in touch with me. Until next time, bye for now.